Welcome to the Creative Life Podcast. My name is Caroline and I am your host. And today I am so excited to be joined by one of my favorite people in the world, novelist Katie Sise. Now, I've known Katie about 25 years. Wow, yeah, 25 years. And it's been incredible to see her over this time go from being an actor to being a jewelry designer, to being a television host, and then to becoming a published and very prolific writer. Her books include The Creative Girl, The Ultimate Guide for Turning Talent and Creativity into a Real Career, The Boyfriend App, The Pretty App, The Academy, and adult novels We Were Mothers, Open House, The Break, and most recently, The Vacation Rental. I really enjoy Katie's writing, mostly because she always gets me with a twist. I never see it coming. I am I am the most naive reader, and then here it comes and she gets me every time. So if you feel the same way about Katie's writing and that's what's brought you to the podcast today because you're a fan of Katie's, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad that you're here. Katie's going to talk about it all today. She's going to cover her path to becoming a writer, what she goes through in her creative process and what her life looks like now, but also some of the key experiences that have gotten her to this point. I loved talking with her, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing it too. So without further ado, here is Katie Sise. Can you just talk a little bit about your path a little bit, like as a creative, getting to where you are now in your career as a writer, and kind of how did that all unfold? I mean, I know that's a lifetime story, but like, are there like key points that really jump out to you in like how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, definitely key points. It does feel like since I was little, I knew I wanted to work creatively. And especially in college, I sort of realized that the things that I was the most drawn to, whether it was theater, acting, and writing, those were things that I really wanted to do. But when I graduated and moved to the city, I started acting and really not booking jobs and, not making any money at all. And so even though I loved it, the other thing that I noticed was what I really loved about it was the work. Like I really loved to be with other people or working on a creative project. And so in college, I was able to do that all the time, like always was in rehearsal with somebody or rehearsing on a show. And I really loved to work. And when I graduated, it felt more, when we were living in New York, it felt more like auditioning. So you didn't get to do as much of the creative work all the time. And I think that for that reason, I went back into writing. I thought, okay, well, while I'm doing this, I'll just be able to work and really do creative work, because at the end of the day, that's the part that makes me the happiest. It's kind of like to make something or to have something that didn't exist before, whether that's a story, a short story, a book, a play, whatever it is, something that never existed sort of to come into existence and to kind of birth that is always the really fun part. So I started writing a ton in my early 20s. And I was working, first I was bartending so that I could write in the morning and audition and have my days free, which worked out pretty well. And at one point, I think around age 24, I started working at this little boutique. And again, at this point, I was still trying to do some acting, but I was having a lot of luck selling jewelry, sort of just making jewelry. And that was another creative outlet. And so all of these things together, I sort of thought, okay, well, there's got to be a place somewhere in here for how to, to do a little bit of writing and to do some TV work based on all these things that were happening at the time, which the thing that was actually making money at the time was making this jewelry. And so I started doing some television hosting kind of based on that. Even though it wasn't acting, it was still using on-camera skills and using them in a way that, felt really kind of grounded in what my life was then, which was a lot of style stuff. So I would do these style segments and it was so much fun. And it was really fun to work on camera. And then that got me thinking as I kind of went into my mid-20s doing these style segments and selling my jewelry and feeling like actually very creatively fulfilled, because a lot of my day was still free to work on writing, even though I hadn't sold anything yet. So I kind of had these different, like almost like a trifecta of different things that I was working on that I really enjoyed, even though they weren't really lucrative, but it was sort of a way to spend my 20s heading in that direction. And then—
Can I interrupt you for a second and ask you a question about that?
Mm-hmm.
This time in your life, like what kind of like percentage of an average day would you say was spent on each of these different pursuits?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would say that so my actual day job at the boutique didn't start until 12. That changed somewhere in the middle of that and started, I think it changed, the hours changed to 11 at one point, but usually I would spend the entire morning. So I would wake up and spend at least 2 to 3 hours writing, because that's always the hard thing. That's always the thing that takes more brain power for me, at least. And so I have to get it done in the morning. So I would write in the morning, and then I would go into the boutique, and then it was like a very social part of the day. So the morning was really solitary, just writing. And then I would go in and into this boutique, and I was working there. I was selling some jewelry there. And one of the nice things was that I was always surrounded by creative people there. And so there was lots of creative ideas, and sort of like I was surrounded by other women and men, mostly women, who were pursuing a creative lifestyle. And I loved talking to them and loved talking kind of about their own circuitous path towards creativity. And somewhere in there, kind of towards the later part of it, I thought, it would be really cool if there was a book about this, like this idea of making a living creatively and really examining how that could work, how circular the path can be, and how it can look. So, and kind of based on what you like if you like having a creative job, surrounded by tons of other people, or if you want your creativity to be something on the side and it's really solitary and you want to have your own business, maybe you're making something or pursuing something, just a little more solitary rather than in an office space. And I thought I just thought it would be a cool book to talk about the path of that, because what I had seen with my friends, most of my friends from where I went to college didn't pursue something creative. So they had more straightforward, like they wanted to work in marketing, or they went and got a law degree, or they went and got an MD, something that was a much more straightforward path. And I thought that it would be really interesting to have there be a book about this creative path and finding work creatively. And so I wrote a book proposal for a book called Creative Girl. And that was in my late 20s. And I sort of drew on, this experience of working in a boutique and making jewelry and being on television. But those were obviously only two very small, creative jobs that were really specific. So I then interviewed tons of women for the book. And that was really eye-opening. And it felt like a continuation of what my life had been like in my 20s, which was kind of trying to surround myself with creative women. And I always just sort of I just remember really wanting to be part of the conversation. I remember feeling this like I wanted to be producing creative work and talking about it. And I wanted that to be my lifestyle. And I, just really wanted to get there. And so another way to kind of pursue that was to do this creative book. And that was a ton of fun. I met, so many different women. It was a book specifically focused on women and creativity. And it was great. And what I loved the most about it was I just loved writing a book. And so then I had a wonderful—
This was your first full book you had written,
first
right?
full book. Yes, exactly. Yep. So
the writing you were doing at this time, was it more like the creative writing you were doing? Was it more like short stories and things like this at the time?
Short stories. That, by the way, I remember I never sought publication. So I truly wrote in my 20s as a way to enjoy it. It was like just completely something I enjoyed. I didn't really know that much about publishing. And I hadn't really thought about it. But then when I had this idea for the nonfiction book, I took a writing class. I actually took several writing classes at Media Bistro. And I think they still have online courses. I loved taking classes with them because they broke down how the business worked. And now I have all these, fellow writers who work in publishing, and I understand it after, nearly 15 years. I feel like I get it. But at the time, I didn't even know what to do. I didn't know that you had to write a proposal if you wanted to sell a nonfiction book, and usually a full manuscript if you want to sell a novel. And I didn't know how to get an agent. So I took a bunch of classes and kind of tried to soak up anything I could online about how to do that. And it was one of those things where the first book sold easily, but the second didn't. So the first book was Creative Girl. It was this nonfiction book about women pursuing creativity and women in work and kind of how to make that happen, or at least, that was the goal, is like how giving people different strategies. But then I loved writing so much, my agent was like, okay, we'll try a novel. And I tried a novel and I wrote it, probably kind of to get back to your original question, I usually would write for between 3 and 6 hours a day. And I don't have that muscle built up as much now. Now I'm more like a 2 to 3 hour a day writing. But back then I had more stamina. And so I would do it for a while and then just go about my day and do other things, whether that was making jewelry or, and then, so I wrote a novel and I loved it so much. And I just loved it. I still love this book. We've never sold it, but I love it. I wrote it. And then I remember my agent went out with it, and we got all rejections. And I was so upset. And, just because, I remember I cried myself to sleep for the first time since high school.
Yeah.
I was so upset. It just was like heartbreaking. But I'm pretty stubborn. And I thought, okay, well then I'm just going to keep going until one of these novels works. So then I had, the privilege of time, right? Like time and space and a safe place to work. So I kept going and kept writing. And then I actually at that point submitted, I thought a friend of mine was ghostwriting for Alloy, which was a packaging company, and they do amazing stuff. I mean, they do like Vampire Diaries and kind of these big series that you've heard of. And I submitted a sample to be a ghostwriter on a book, on a mystery, on a New York Times bestselling
How did
mystery
you
series.
find out about it? How did you find out about the opportunity?
Well, then I found out about it through a friend of mine who was a writer. And I would say that this is where all those writing classes helped, because then suddenly I was surrounded by writers. And that was really helpful. It was just like a way to put myself in the world of writers. I started going to book readings all the time. Like I would, try to figure out where they were. Now it's so much easier, right? Because our online things are so much easier to find. But back then was, back in the dark ages, and there wasn't. I had to kind of just word of mouth and try to figure out where stuff was. And I tried to really surround myself with writers, and that was really helpful. So for example, this writer friend of mine who was very generous, with her contacts and her connections, she's like, well, you should try for this. And so I submitted a sample and then got that job, and then ghost wrote 3 novels. One of them I did a revision on, and the other 2 I ghost wrote. And that was a good way to sort of get paid to do writing, which was the first time. The second time since Creative Girl where that had happened. So it was really exciting. And it was a good way to practice kind of under someone else's name. Like I felt like I got this lesson in plotting and mystery writing. And they were a lovely company to work for. The author was lovely. It was a really good experience. And so then once I kind of had that squared and I had done it, I was like, okay, well now I know how to do this. It was kind of like a crash course in writing novels. And then the other thing that happened through that was that an agent that worked in my agency knew that I had done that and knew that I had ghostwritten, even though it was like a project that I couldn't openly, like I couldn't really talk that much about, but she knew about it for some reason. And then she and I were talking, and she said, I have this idea for this book called The Boyfriend App. Like she had a title picked out, and she said, it would basically be a girl, there'd be an app that could get you a boyfriend. And that's all she said. And then she said, why don't you just like try to write it? And she gave me total freedom to just go for it from there. And then we sold that book on a proposal, which doesn't usually happen. Usually you have to write your first novel in full. So I got lucky there. I wrote a proposal. Plus they knew that I was able to finish novels because I had done so in the past. And then it sold to HarperCollins in a preempt, which is when they kind of just like, they give you an offer that, to kind of just go with them, which was great. And so I loved doing novels for them. So I had a really, really good editor at HarperCollins who I loved. And I did 3 books for her. They were young adult, and they were kind of like quirky romantic comedies. And then I switched over, sort of that feeling of when you want to try something new. I had this one summer where I had done a revision on one of those books, and it was like kind of a bear of a revision. It was really, really kind of strenuous compared to, not compared to actual hard things in life, but compared to revisions I'd done before. And so my agent said to me that summer, he's like, why don't you take the summer off and just write something that you would want to read, which was the best advice I'd ever gotten. And so then I sat down and I literally followed his advice and wrote what I'd want to read, which was a book called We Were Mothers. And I wrote it in 6 weeks because I was so excited. I couldn't wait to see what had happened. And it was really exciting to like write about adults and their bad behavior. I felt like they could do anything. And it wasn't like when I was writing for a teen audience, I always felt like there should be maybe better behavior. And so my adults were not in good behavior. They were doing all kinds of things during that novel, and I couldn't put it down. And I remember I actually would go with Luke, my son, who was then, oh my gosh, he probably was 6 at the time. And we would go sit at the library. He would have a book and I would write this book. And it really wrote itself because I couldn't wait to see what happened. And then we sold that book to a different publisher, to Amazon. And so that was many years ago. And then I'm now on my 4th book is about to come out. My 4th book with Amazon is about to come out next week. And so that's kind of in the trajectory next week. Yeah, April 1st. Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm really excited.
I know that. Oh
Yeah. I think you'll like this one. It's fun.
I'm sure it will. I like all.
Yeah, it's fun. This is like a very long and winding path.
No, but this is really interesting. So, because I think I knew some of this, and of course, like, because I've known you, but it's interesting to hear you tell it in the way that you tell it, to kind of like tell the story. Because what I'm here, like, some major things jumped out at me from listening to you talk about it. I think the company you keep has been, from what I just heard, it seems like that's been like a major like formative thing in your creative life is like not just I kind of didn't think about that in the aspect of even just doing Creative Girl and then going into Media Bistro and then like your editors and like kind of like but the company you keep and like being amongst other writers and other creative people and how that sort of just has pushed you forward. And then the other thing I think is sort of like I'm also hearing you say that you've kind of like rolled with the opportunities you were given.
Mm-hmm.
Does
Yeah,
that
I
make
would
sense?
definitely. Yeah, I think so. Or at least tried so many that like tried 1,000 things so that like I feel like the
Right.
things besides saying the part that failed, besides saying the one novel that failed, it's like there's also been so many other failures. Like I completely just failed last month at something, but it's like I feel like I've tried like 1,000 creative things. And so it's like, well, of course, some stuff,
Yeah, how
you
do you
know?
yeah, talk to me about failure a little bit because I think failure is something
Yeah.
that people do, are afraid of,
Mm-hmm.
but then also like can be like the greatest gift,
Totally. Yeah.
but is also completely essential to how we develop and learn as humans.
As humans. Yeah. You can't learn otherwise, I don't think.
Tell me a little bit about failure. Like when
Yeah.
your first big failure was that the novel that you can remember that felt like a
I
really
would
big.
say so I would say like big failures would be, I mean, even moving to New York and you and I have talked about this. It's not even like I would say I sort of came thinking like, okay, well, in college I was able to book all these roles. Like surely I will book a bunch of things here. And it felt like and again, so much of it also was like I was coming there without again being maybe not being surrounded in the right. Maybe it would have been different if I came and I had already set up that I knew, XYZ and I had a manager or I had somebody who was like knew exactly what to do because I certainly did not. Um and so I would say the first big failure would be kind of just not really booking anything substantial um in New York that felt like, okay, well, this is heading in the right direction. And I quickly, like, I didn't have much of a tolerance for that kind of failure because it felt like I couldn't even do the work to get better. It almost felt like what I
Yeah.
loved about writing was that I could actually practice by myself. On all I needed was a computer, and once I had that, I could go. I mean, just constantly practice all the time. Whereas acting, I always felt like, my God, I've got to get cast in something first to like, and you can certainly do monologues in your room, which I did do. But
Yeah, that's kind of like
right?
yeah.
You like get cast before you can start to really hone your work and or so I would say the first big failure was realizing like, wait a minute, I have got to figure out something. I wanted to work creatively. And again, it was sort of that thing I said about wanting to be in the conversation. I just remember um really and I there's a character like this in The Break. You read The Break. It's the character of June that and she talks about wanting to be in the conversation and that's how I always felt. I was like I just want to be in the room. Like I want to be the person who wrote the story that or the person who's acting in the story but definitely the person who like wrote the story and has ideas and knows how to execute them and has the ability to like to work creatively. That's really what I wanted. So I kind of quickly pivoted when I realized, oh, this isn't working. And I guess that worked out, knock on wood. But and then I would say more failures along the way would definitely be that first novel not selling. When I go back and I am when I'm at home and I look at my journals, I also see all these old ideas for like shows that I had that I tried to pitch when I was doing the TV hosting. None of them went. So like there's always like all these notebooks of like ideas of books and projects and things, and all of them didn't go. Like I actually almost even only remember them through like times when I wrote them down and realized like, oh, I failed at that, I failed at that, I failed at that. I mean, like I failed at like 1,000
Well, I
things.
mean that's really interesting. So do you think you have a right, so that this is a sidebar question. So you have a lot of ideas,
Mhm.
clearly.
Yes,
Like a
that's
lot
right.
of ideas popping in your head all the time for different things you could be doing or projects. What do you do with those ideas? Do you write them down to store them away? Do you focus on them for short periods of time or do you put them away and keep on tack of what you're doing? Do you
That's
know what I
such a
mean?
good question. So what I try to do is, so my way of procrastinating, and I think this works for me, you know better than anyone that my way of procrastinating is not like organizing my closet. It's not like Brian wishes, my husband wishes that I was, but like it's not. So my way of procrastinating is actually to work on other creative projects. So I have to do the main project that's due. And I do turn my stuff and I honestly do, maybe with the exception of like once, turn in all my projects on time because ultimately I feel really lucky to be working creatively and I feel like that can be snatched away at any second. And so I feel very lucky to have like a money coming in that's made that way. And so I do turn my books in on time. So I know, for example, I right now have a deadline that is June 1st, which is I really hope my editor doesn't hear it, but I am like so behind. It's fine if she hears it. She kind of already knows I'm so behind. But I will get that done by June 1st. But meanwhile, what I've been doing all year to procrastinate has been like writing other stuff. I wrote a script. I wrote this young adult project that I'm like really excited about, a book that's a mystery. So I wrote the first, let's say, 15, 20,000 words of that. So usually books are around like 80,000. So that's my way of procrastinating. I will literally do every other project than the one that's under contract, which makes no sense, but it's fine because at least it's not procrastinating, I don't even know what.
Do you think that the procrastinating or the side projects serve a purpose?
Yes, because I think that they're a distraction. Like in the same way I like to read a lot of books at once, I think they're like a little break from the current project. So I do try to kind of get in there and do the current project, but then it's like, oh, I should just try to do this and get this done so I can then go work on this other thing. And then, by the way, if that other thing was under contract, it might also feel like the thing that's the harder one to do for some reason.
Yeah, is the contract motivating?
Yeah, I like being under deadline. I have to be under deadline. I feel like that's a really helpful thing. So,
Does it feel good or is it fear-based? Does it feel like really good to have that parameter, or is it?
no, it feels good to have that parameter, but with like a healthy dash of not wanting to, maybe it's not fear-based, but it's like not wanting to disappoint my editor. Like I really respect my editor. So I'm kind of like, I don't want to turn this in late because then what will I say? Oh, sorry, Carmen, I was working on something else. Also, I was taking lots of dog walks. Like I feel like she would know that there wasn't a really good reason. And so I don't want to have that conversation. So that's probably a little fear-based. I do not want to have that conversation.
Does your editor in your field, does your editor and your publisher determine the deadlines, or do you determine the deadlines, or is it a bit of a conversation of both?
It's usually a good conversation. And she knows that I can write something quickly. So she'll sort of, like we talked a little bit about a spring delivery. And by the way, if I've had a lot of coffee when we've had that conversation, I will be like, well, I can write this in 3 months. And every time I'm like, why did I say that? I should never have a phone call about a deadline before probably 1 p.m. because it's the morning and everyone's off to school and I've had like 4 cups of coffee. I'm like, I'm going to get this to you possibly next week. Like, it's like not a good plan. And then, but ultimately I do like having a deadline. And I would say that when you say, what do you do with the ideas? Like when they come, I do have lots of different documents on my computer. And sometimes I'll dive back in even like 3 years later and I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Like that. I like that title. Or maybe that title could be, I've definitely gone back and done old books.
I do. I do that too. I have to brain dump. Like I have to kind of like just like write it down or put it on a list so that I can stop obsessing about it because I know I'm not going to lose it. Like go sort of. Okay, so tell me a little bit about like how you like to work, and like now if you're working on something, let's say you've got like this deadline June 1, do you still like to write in the morning, or do you like to spread, now that you have a little more, this is your main gig, you also are a mom, so now you're doing other things too. Do you like to do a little bit every day? Do you like to have a very organized sort of like structure about it? Or do you like to, go in bursts and kind of just like when you feel motivated, do you set the time or does the time set you? I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
I would say the time sets me, and it would be, so if everybody's at school, usually I'll put everybody on the bus around 8:40. And then I'll really, truly try to sit down from 9 to 11 at least and try to get some stuff done, which usually works. But you know how it is. It's like sometimes something else comes up or someone forgot something or you have just a life thing to do, like you have a doctor's appointment or something. But I try to write every day. And now with this deadline coming up, what I also have been trying to do, and this is kind of the when push comes to shove thing for me, this is how I got the last book done also, is I have to get up really early because there's something about writing in the morning before all the even like texts, about the kids stuff during the day, or like arranging who has practice and who has this and who has that. Once that kind of starts to happen around 9:30, like my brain feels like it's going in different places versus the really early morning hours around 4. I can often.
Did you say 4? Like you might get up and
4 or 5. Yeah, sometimes 4 or 5. And sometimes as I get closer to the deadline, my body just naturally wakes up then. And then I just kind of, I'm like, okay, I gotta work. I don't set an alarm. But I find that when I get closer to deadline, it starts naturally happening. And there have been phases where I have started to set the alarm, but usually right now, I swear it starts happening once I know that it has to happen. Like that's the best way to just crank out a bunch of words. And I try to do in a normal life day, I would try to do 1,000 words a day. That's always a really good goal because usually books are about 70,000 words. They can be certainly longer, 80,000, 90,000. But usually I need to turn in something that's at least 70,000 words. So really you could write a book in 70 days if you did 1,000 words a day. And then when things start to get really cranking along, sometimes I'll have bigger days that are like 3,000 and 4,000. And those are great days because you can really see that word count whittle away. The problem is that you can't always go by that because sometimes you get to the end of the book. This happened to me last time and I was like, oh, thank God, I only have 10,000 words left. But then really the story needed another like 25 to be, kind of told. And I had for that. Yeah.
Do you like to take days off if you're not under the gun?
No,
Do you
I had my best, if I could do my ideal schedule, it would be writing every day, but certainly not all day every day. Just those kind of.
But you like to do something every day. You like to do something every day.
I really do. I really do. Yep.
Okay. Where do you like to write?
I now write, well, I put this, one of the things that changed kind of my whole writing schedule, and I now sometimes write at night because of it, is I put a chair up in my room that was a chair that I used with the kids. So it's really comfortable. And so it is so comfortable that I'll sit sometimes at night and look over something or write, particularly if it's a fun project, I'll work on it at night. That's like my procrastinating projects, or sometimes at night. And sometimes if I have energy, I can do it at night. But then in the day, I either will sit in there again, or I'll sit down at the dining room table because it has like a view out to the woods. I've had different writing stations over the years. And for the longest time, one of them was truly in the tiniest little room with no natural light at all, with like no windows. Like it was in our old house when you walked in. It was like a mudroom. There was coats and things. It was not, it certainly wasn't like a glorious workspace, but it was fine. And it was warm and it worked. But now I do have a room I like to write in where it looks out onto the forest, which I like, especially because a lot of my books seem to have woods in them. Like I find the woods a little.
Do you like to mix it up? Like, do you feel like you burn out on a space and then you want a new space, or you kind of just?
Yeah, I do think that's part of it. Yeah, to have a little something else to look at in the background, because sometimes I find myself going to different rooms in the house, like doing one at the kitchen table, then moving to that dining room table, and then sometimes coming back up here to the comfier, kind of loungier chair. And I do think it helps, especially when you're by yourself and you like all day long working by yourself can be really tiring. Like I have again, I'm so happy to be working. So I don't mean tiring in a complaining way, but just sort of like you have the feeling of, okay, I need a little something different. Like it's often good in the day if the middle of the day is a little broken up by something social also.
Well, that was the next thing I was going to ask, is like, it is sort of a solitary thing. And you started off talking about how like you really loved like having that community around you before. Like, what do you do now to kind of seek that out and add that in?
So I was just talking with a friend of mine because I haven't figured that out with writing. Like, I suppose I could go with a few more writers to a different workspace. But I do really miss that. Like, I think I would love a writer's room. I think I would love like the way TV writers are all in one room throwing ideas back and forth. I really miss that aspect of theater. So I haven't really quite figured out how to be a novelist and have like a more social work life. One trick that works sometimes is even to just go to the library. Like I love our librarians in our town. So like I'll even just even to walk in and say hello to them and just make small talk for 5 minutes. And by the way, you have to have an outfit on that's not, I mean, I still sometimes wear my pajamas, but at least there's like shoes involved and like you walk in a place and and I get to talk to them for a little bit. And so that sometimes that even does the trick. It feels more social. Really, when the book comes out, there's a lot more social stuff going on. Oh, the one thing I have figured out in the last year is I've really enjoyed doing some conferences where, like, let's say I'm on a panel, but then maybe I get to watch another panel that day and then everyone socializes, in the lobby and talks about books. So that's been very social. So I've done that last year.
Do you enjoy the business aspect?
I do. I love conversations because I like pretending like I'm in Succession in that show. Do you watch that show?
Yes.
I literally, or I'm on Entourage in my own mind when I'm talking to my agent, we talk really fast. We talk about business stuff. Like it's so exciting, it's not, but it is to me. So I love any business aspect of creativity. I just love, I'm like, this and that, and we've got to talk to this person. And what about, I just love those conversations. So yeah, I do like the business aspect. It's really exciting to be on submission too. Like when you're on submission with a book, you don't know if it's going to sell or not. And you're like getting feedback from the editors and you're excited and then you're devastated and you're all the feelings. So yeah, I do like that. I do like that part.
There's the drama.
When the book comes out, like it'll be more suspenseful and exciting when the book comes out next week. And I think because most of it is so just every day at that computer, so solitary, getting the book done, that any change from that feels like incredibly exciting. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go do a reading in April at a store. And I'm like, well, that will be about the most exciting thing I've done. And I just tried on 10 outfits for it today with the kids, like figuring out like what, I mean, so yeah, I like fully enjoy all those things. Because again, they're really social compared to the solitariness of, okay, it's like the 120th day and we are on the same, project. We're on page 72 and we've got to just,
What's the time frame here from like first word on the page to the book comes out? What's a typical time frame we're looking at?
So everybody is really different. So you see a lot of authors who might come out with something literally every 5 years. They come out with some gorgeous masterpiece. In my genre, which is psychological suspense, basically, or domestic suspense, it's more likely that you would have something come out every year to 2 years. So I would say I get the contract, and then I maybe have 8 months to a year to write it, which is still a good amount of time. And I'm used to writing them faster because I had to write them faster when I was working for Alloway. I had to write a first draft in like 8 weeks. So that was, but they were already outlined for me. So it was a bit easier there. But 8 months to a year is plenty of, or at least for my type of book, that gives me enough time. And again, I will stall on that deadline, write other things. And then, I think I had like 4 months to go. And I thought to myself, like, well, maybe my editor has just forgotten what we talked about for the timeline. And then I got an email from her and she was like, well, how far are you in? Are we still looking at like a, spring delivery? And I was like,
sure.
You mean spring next year? Right. Yeah. So, but yeah, I would say that's about for me. And then it takes another year really in post-production between editing. So then you're editing back and forth for a while and someone's reading your work, your editor's reading, and then they're doing big picture changes and you make the big picture changes and you might have to turn it back in 3 weeks later. Now you've got like a back and forth going. That's much more time sensitive. So she might say, okay, this is due in 10 days, this revision on this. And then you would have, after that, it gets really detailed down to someone who's, if there's a period or comma missing, the editor will be in there doing some,
So there are a lot of eyes on the project. I mean, it sounds like at this stage in your career, like you're like, there are many, many eyes on it, many, many drafts.
Many drafts. Yeah.
Do you enjoy the back and forth?
Yeah, because I think it's, again, that collaborative project that I really like. Like there's probably only been, let's say she's made, and however many suggestions, I would say 99% of them I've agreed with and taken, because I feel like it's so good to have an outside eye. And then if I really feel strongly and have to push back on something, they also don't change. There's not that much change. Like they're constantly making it better, but it's always in a good forward. It's almost always in a really good forward direction.
They're not overhauling the story or something. It's
no, not at all. Mm-mm. Maybe they were like many, many books ago, but by now I feel like if I haven't figured out more of what's expected of me, at this point in the game, usually it's a little more straightforward of a revision.
So tell me a little bit about like I know you well because I've known you a long time, but like, do you think that you were always this way about the things you were pursuing? Like, were you always like creative in the sense of like looking for something to do that was a creative outlet or thinking about something in a new way? Is this something that was just who you are even when you were a kid?
I think so, even though I think probably for other people, maybe if they weren't creative as a kid, they could come to it later. I definitely think that too. But for me, it was definitely as I was a kid. And I see that now with my kids now, like they love, they really love creative stuff. And but I remember definitely being young and my parents, and I would always hear that sort of, you're so creative. You hear that people will say that like, oh, you're so creative. Or people would, like I remember having English teachers that were really supportive of writing, which was so helpful. And then, but so yeah, I would say that I always loved drawing stuff and making stuff and writing. I always loved writing stories when I was little. That was just, I loved writing a story down. And I did it all the time. I would do it up in my room and just kind of come up with, these big long notebooks of stuff.
Tell me a little bit about your educational experience. Like, do you feel like you were encouraged to be creative and free thinking in your education?
Yes, I would say so. Definitely. And in fact, if I needed to be reined in, I was like, I remember taking a class with someone who I'm still really close with. It's my history teacher in high school. And she kind of was like, okay, you are a beautiful writer, but like, can we get some facts in this essay? Like this is an essay about, some really important moment in history. And I was, writing a flourishing sentence that really didn't have enough substance. my way out of it. And so I would say I was reined in when I needed to be, but definitely was encouraged by teachers, which, as you know, is so helpful when someone thinks that you have something to say, which is hard when you leave college and then all of a sudden you're in a world where maybe nobody does want to hear the creative idea yet. But I would say definitely during my education, I had tons of teachers at Notre Dame, especially, who were really good about letting me do even some side things with them. I remember there was this poetry teacher who let me do she would meet me on Tuesdays and we would look at writing. And I loved my teachers there. I remember writing a play that they put on there and then doing the plays and performing in them and enjoying that. And I would say that they were also really good about helping me understand the hard work that's involved in a creative life, that it's not just like you barely do anything. It's almost like, no, you're constantly working on something all the time. Or at least that's what I have found to be helpful.
What about at home? Would you say you were like living in a creative house, or was it just, were you
No.
the creative?
Yes, I was definitely the creative in the house. Yeah. So I would say I was definitely the creative in that house, but they were really, really great. My parents were really supportive of it, even though they were not creative, but they are. I mean, in some ways, everybody's creative, right? And so, and I always think about my dad's family because they're really good. My mom's family is all creative. And my dad's family are like a bunch of wonderful storytellers who have kind of like a creative flair, and understand like the grasp of a story, which I feel like is half the part of my job, is just like actually understanding the parts of the story to tell. Like when someone grabs you in a conversation, whether that's verbally, like you could be at drop off. And if you're in the hands of a really good storyteller, you can kind of like sit back and enjoy yourself. So I love like the different ways that stories are told. And I think like either verbally or all kinds of ways, but obviously I love them written down. And I think when I mean, I just think of my uncles on that side of the family and my dad's family. I mean, they can tell a story that you are riveted by. And, so I think they had their own ways of being really creative, and everybody really stressed sort of doing as well as you could in school and working really hard at whatever it was, so I definitely saw that from my parents. I definitely saw hard work from my parents, even if it wasn't in creative fields, which was helpful.
Yeah, I do think that what you're saying is like, I feel like the creative impulse is a human impulse, like the desire to make something and to make something new. And people just, self-actualized people who have pretty happy lives, I think that's a big part of it, is finding a way, somewhere to put that energy. And that energy, like for some people, it's like the desire to have children is a creative urge.
Yeah.
Right? Like the desire to cook dinner and try something is people, I think that there's a lot of like mental wellness that comes from
definitely
finding a place to put your creative energy, whatever it is.
And I agree that it can be all kinds of things.
Do you like total free reign to do whatever you want, or do you like parameters?
Oh, I love total free reign, to the point where I recently had a project that had a lot of notes, not a book project, something else that I was working on. And I was like, oh, this is good. This is good for me because I haven't had this in a long time. And it was like good for my ego to go a little bit in check and be like, okay, you don't really know what you're doing on this because it's something new and someone else is giving you a lot of feedback, and that's okay. You have to like learn to do the feedback and get it done. But I love total free reign. I mean, that's the best when someone says to you, just go, I trust you. Like my editor said that recently. I called her in the middle of a book and I was like, I don't know. And then like, well, what if I do this? And she was like, I just trust that you know exactly what your readers want. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a nice trust to have. And then I, figured it out from there. But it's good when someone really trusts you and like thinks that you have the ability to get the job done. And they'll kind of go along for the ride if you're, as long as it's a good story and you're doing it hopefully successfully.
Do you see yourself continuing on this path of writing novels for the duration of your career as like your main thing, or would you like to see it morph and change? Are you looking for a new avenue or a new outlet, or are you do you feel like this one gives you enough room to grow that you could stay here?
Yeah, I feel like novels give you enough room that you could grow and stay. So I would love for novels to always be the main thing. Like I would love to always be a novelist and have that be the thing that, writing a book every year to two. But I think it would also be really, really fun to write one of them for screen. I just think that would be really fun to figure out how to do it. And then to see it told. Again, it's like that storytelling thing I think is at the heart of what I really love, is that you're telling a story that is completely made up, but that feels so real to me, and it feels so actualized, and like it really actually exists somewhere, which I just love. Like it starts from nothing, and then all of a sudden you have this whole world, and I love that. And so the thought of seeing it in not only my words on the page, but in someone else's interpretation of that, like what it looks like, who the actors are, sort of how they move in the scene and how that was something that I had conceived of or not. I just love that being another thing to be able to do. And so I would say, yes, I want this to be the main thing, but with hopefully, and there's also a lot of room within novels. Like I really want to write a young adult novel again, but do it in this mystery genre. So there's all kinds of things that I feel like I want to do that maybe wouldn't always be psychological suspense, though that is my favorite and kind of still is my favorite. And I hope to continue to do that because I really like it. I like writing towards a twist. And I like not knowing what's going to happen. I like sitting down every day and kind of being like, what is going to happen? What are they going to do? You know, it feels like watching Netflix. And
in your brain.
And I just love it. I just like in my own right, and I just don't know what they're going to do. And I love that part of it. And so I think that happens a lot with suspense, but I'd also love at some time point, you know, maybe try like a quieter novel that takes a long time to write, you know, I mean, there's so many, so I think within novels, there's enough room to grow, but I do know that I would love to see something like to be able to write something or see it on the screen in some way. It would be really cool.
Do you miss acting?
I do. Yeah, I do miss acting. It would be fun to like go back and do a play or something when I had more, you know, right now I don't really have time in the evenings because I feel like that's often when the kids and I are doing all of the things that we're doing, but maybe at some point to go back and do a play would be really fun. Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
When you're in between books or you've kind of gotten one finished and you're starting another one, do you like to have some space in between them or do you like to go right into the next one and keep the pace?
I like to have a little bit of space. I definitely do go right in because the beginning of a book is sometimes really fun. And then there's like a lull. The first 20,000 I always think are the hardest words to write, but sometimes it's fun when you're first like outlining it and brainstorming and not even outlining the plot, but just like figuring out what it's about. But no, like then there are times like even with this one that I'm currently writing, there's a part of me that's like, oh, I could use a little more space between, because I have the one that's coming out. I kind of want to, you know, use all the time doing the publicity side of that. And I'm sort of like, okay, but I have to like hurry up and get this one. And so I could probably use a little more time between. And I don't think that even then I wouldn't like stop writing stuff. That's the thing. I would then just, you know, work on, you know, something random or something. But it's hard because you want to build up momentum too. Like you want them to come out every year to two because then readers are like, they remember what you did before. And then they're like, oh, well, there's another one, you know, so even just from a business standpoint, it's nice to have them coming out.
Okay. So that's a little bit of a driving force.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wanting to keep your audience or wanting to like, yeah. How much do you think about the audience when you're writing the book? Because you kind of know your readers now, I feel like.
Yeah. And and the biggest thing I think that they expect, which is what I try to really keep in mind, is I really feel that they expect a twist that they did not, like a huge twist. And I feel confident like about the one that's coming out. What I'm so excited about is that I don't, you know, it's not like I reread it recently and it's not like I'm like, oh my gosh, it's perfect. It's the best book ever. I can't believe it. I don't feel that way, but I feel like it's, you know, what I'm proud of is that I just think that there are two twists that I really do not think that I think people will be surprised. And that makes me really excited because there's only so many twists out there, right? And people who read these books, one of the things that I'm the most proud of is that people are often like, we didn't know who your killer was. We didn't know who the perpetrator of the crime. We were totally taken by shock. And I think part of that is because then I didn't know either, you know, and it's like totally surprises me when he comes out of thin air or she, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that's who it was. I kind of let myself just be open to anything happening in the book. Sometimes I know, but then like in this book I'm currently writing, though, I have no idea.
Are you in the space of the characters when you're writing it? Like, are you kind of like?
Yeah. And that's actually, I think when acting helps, like, this is why I think what these funny things about these circuitous